Hello, this is Christian here. This is an introduction to arrays in PHP. And this video will be talking about the characteristics of the array structure. And then we'll see how single dimension arrays are created. These are also known as the indexed arrays. And we'll look at two-dimensional arrays and also the multi-dimensional arrays like 3D arrays and things like that. We'll also look at how associative arrays are created and how to traverse the arrays. So the characteristics of an array structure is that arrays are a type of data structure. Now there are many types of data structures, things like a list, a linked list, a hash table, a map. All these are different types of data structures, and arrays are one of them. An array is really just a collection of data, or also known as an ordered map. And because of that, arrays do not store data, but only the references to the actual data. So that means in PHP you can store any type of data, and because PHP is a loosely typed language, then you don't really care what's the actual data. You can store any types. That is not true for other languages like Java and C and C++. These are strictly typed languages. They require that the data type must be the same, right? So you have some restriction there. And arrays can be accessed or manipulated by using the indices or keys. And there are indexed arrays, there are associative arrays, these are the key value pairs. And generally all arrays are associative arrays. We'll see how that works in a little bit. Here is a single dimensional indexed array, or called a 1D array. If you look at this, they are very identical to the columns and rows in the table. So if you pick up one column, one row, it will look something like that. Let's just say these are scores of a certain exam or a game or test, so it doesn't matter, right? We'll see how we can access this data. And the index value always starts at 0, and this is a default and it's automatic because PHP is a zero-based language. That means we have an array, the number for the index arrays always start from 0. And negative indices are allowed. More on this later. We'll talk about the associative arrays. And say if I want to access a certain value in this table or in this row or column here, I need to access the index and then I'll get the value. So for example, if I want to get 30 from this scores array, I would just put scores index of 2 or the subscript 2, and that returns the value 30 in this slot. So this is a two-dimensional indexed arrays, or 2D. It looks just like a table, right? It is a table, actually. It's a 2D table, and it represents the rows and columns. The first index, represents the row, and the second represents the column. And so if I want to access it, I will just call the scores with the two subscripts. And if I want to get the score 4,000, then I will access row 2, column 3, and I get 4,000 out of that table. Let's look at the three-dimensional indexed arrays. It's 3D array. As you can see, it gets complicated now. 3Ds are really just like 2 or more tables, or 2 or more 2D tables or 2D arrays. You put them together, you stack them together, you get a three-dimensional array. And this, in a real-world example, you see this a whole lot, I'm pretty sure, in the game, application, in the 3D environment. In a more practical business scenario would be like, let's say you own a business and you have an office in Irvine, another office in Phoenix, and one office in New York or New York City, right? And so each office has, employees. So if you want to know a certain employee, then you have to go to the region, and then from the region you can get each employee. Okay, so it is a cube. Think about it. It's identical to a cube. It represents the x, y, and z axis of a coordinate system. So the row represents the x-axis, the column represents the y-axis, and the depth represents the z-axis. Okay, so here is another example. They have a pretty nice example here. It's kind of borrowed from them. Has three tables in here. So we have the J, K, and I. So if you want to get a number, let's say 25, that means I will have to go to the j row of row 1, and then the column k of 2, and then the ith, right, ith column, well, ith value of 1 to get the 25. So you would do like scores at 1, 2, and then 1 to get 25. It gets complicated when you go to the fourth dimension, because really a fourth dimension is a 3D array inside another 3D. So, okay, so let's talk about associative arrays. It looks very similar to the indexed arrays. You can see it uses a key value pair, which I mentioned in the earlier slides, is that all arrays are really key value pair because these indices are really just the key. So when you talk about index arrays 0 through n, the keys are 0 through n. These are the keys, and you have the value. So that makes total sense. And you access the values the same way as the indexed arrays. And keys can be numeric or strings only. As far as I know, you cannot put objects in there, for example. And so let's just say, oh, and also negative values are allowed, because now let's just say the number minus 10 you see there is like a negative 10. But I think behind the scene, really, you would use that as a string of minus 10. And PHP will know that is a minus 10, so you can use it directly. In JavaScript, though, you cannot just put a number minus 10. You have to use it as a string. And then once that's been created, you can access it like a numeric value. So just different rules for different languages. And some languages do not allow negative values at all, like Java. Try it and you will find out. So for example, if I don't print out the value of 10, I access the negative 10 key, then the string of age for the index, and then I'll get the value of 10, and the graduated, I'll get a value of 1. And you notice again, you don't get a value of true or false. In PHP, you get a value 0 for false, 1 for true, unlike other languages. Okay, so let's look at different ways how you can traverse an array. Traverse means to loop through or to walk through an array. And there are a couple methods, but two very popular and most common ones. One is you use the for loops or the while loops, right? Or any other loops, basically. And two is use the for each loop. This is only for arrays and objects, and very, very handy in certain situations. So for using the for loop, you can see that back to the scores array again. If you want to print everything out, you're going to loop through the entire column of that array. So I'm starting from column 0 all the way to n. In this case, it would be 4. And so you score, and then you will echo each of those out using the I as the index. For a two-dimensional array or table here, it's very similar. You reference the rows and columns. Say, for example, if I want to, first I need to do the loop for the rows. Okay, so for each row, I'm starting from row 0, for example. And then I need to have a nested loop for that row to iterate through the columns. So for each column. So I would iterate through all the columns for that row. And once I reach the end of the columns, then I will go back to the second row and so on. So that is the array for loops. Now let's try and see what the for each loop look like. So the same array. For each loop, you put the keyword for each there, you put scores as value. Okay, so the array as is a value. So the value, it has to be a variable name. I call the value, it's common to do this way. You can call it whatever you want. You can call it XYZ, doesn't matter, as long as it's a variable. And then you would just echo the value out. Notice that you're not stopping, right? You have no access to the actual value. You can't control it because there's no index to control it. So it will print everything out. If this is something you want to do, this is the most useful one. Okay, so now let's look at the indexed that has the key value pair that is not numeric. So same idea. If I want to print out the keys along with the value, then you would do it this way. For each, and then scores as a variable for the key, followed by the arrow, and then the value. So now I have access to both of those, and this function will give you both the key and the value. Again, I'm called key and value. You can call it, A, arrow B, doesn't matter, as long as they're variable. But the order is in that order. So now if I can print the key and print the value and so on. So pretty So it's pretty fun and pretty powerful in this case, right? Very helpful as well. Okay, so I hope this is helpful for arrays. And if you have any questions, again, please let me know.